this meeting. Oh, sorry, Dina. YMF, also no announcements, but if anybody's interested in joining the YMF, please contact Claire Fukuoka. For our section announcements, our next brown bag virtual meeting that we're trying to facilitate will be a joint meeting with WTS in November. It'll be November 4th at 11:30. So be on the lookout for e-blast, which should be coming out either today or tomorrow. As always, we're always looking for volunteers. So if anybody wants to volunteer for one of our committee chairs or future officer, please see any of or contact any of the current EC officers. Job listings. If you'd like to post any job listings, please visit the ASCEHawaii.org website. If your company is interested in advertising opportunities, please see the website. As always, we're always looking for new members, so please remember to renew your ASCE membership. And if you have any new members, I believe there's a membership drive ongoing, so we're always looking for that new members. Just a few housekeeping rules before we get started. During the presentation, please turn off your cameras other than the presenters. And to kind of keep track or not to interrupt the presentation, we ask that you folks place your questions in the chat box, and the EC members will track the questions, and we'll have a question and answer at the end of the presentation. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Alicia Suzuki with KJ to introduce our presenters for the day.
Thanks, Fred. I'm Alicia Suzuki. I'm the HWEA Vice President this year. So we're happy to have teamed up with ASCE for this Mālama Session. If you missed the first Mālama Session, it's posted on the hwa.org website that you can watch it. And so the first one was Jimmy Kumagai had shared and introduced the Mālama ethic. And so this is the second part of that discussion. And so we'll go around the horn and introduce ourselves. So go ahead, Jim.
Okay, I'm Jimmy Kumagai. I was the first speaker. I'm a life member of the
Hi, my name is Vic Moreland. Same thing, I'm a past president of HWEA, director, and so forth. I'm also a life member. For those who aren't aware, it's a minimum age of 65 and at least 35 years as a member to be a life member. I'm not going to tell you how long I've been a life member though. Anyway, that's it. I'm a semi-retired environmental engineer, still keeping active on a number of areas. And it became a hobby for me over the years, so I've been keeping my hobby alive.
Thank you.
Yeah. Aloha Mai Ka Pō. My name is Brad Kaʻaleleo Wong with the Office of Foreign Affairs. Currently working as the Papahānaumokuākea specialist for OHA, and basically fulfilling OHA's role in the management of Papahānaumokuākea. I'm from Kailua, Oahu, and I have a background in a lot of ocean-related things, whether that's paddling or surfing or fishing or sailing, and pretty much everything in the ocean. But my career has taken me a lot towards doing a lot of natural resource management work, specifically about being inclusive of Hawaiian perspectives into our natural resource management work. So, when I get to share the presentation, I'll talk a little bit more about that. So, thanks you guys for having me.
I'm Cliff Long. I'm the current president for the ASCE Hawaii Section. Been involved for several years in the water wastewater industry, and here to observe the session here at presentation.
All righty. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Brad will give a presentation, and we'll open it up for discussion after that. We hope you guys join. So thank you.
Yeah. So, you know, what I wanted to do is call the session Mai Ka Pō Mai, and I don't know if it was sent out earlier, but I definitely sent it to some of you guys. And it's kind of about this, but Mai Ka Pō Mai is a guidance document that we had put together for Papahānaumokuākea recently, and it's a culmination of about 10 years of consultation with the community, and a lot of it is about how do we implement Hawaiian perspectives into our management in Papahānaumokuākea. And we wanted to, and I'll speak a little bit more to that, but we wanted to be as inclusive as possible so that we can implement it in a way. So it's not necessarily just a, wow, this is a really cool foundational document, but we want it to be usable and we want to take action on it. Yeah, so that's the nexus of it. As far as what Mai Ka Pō Mai means, and I'll explain what po is, but it basically means coming from po, or having that, yeah, I guess information coming from po, or whatever it is coming from this place of po. And po is in the scheme of our archipelago, it is part of the Northwest Hawaiian Islands. It's also a place that we talk about where your ancestors come from and return to upon passing. But it is also a place of inspiration, a place of understanding, and those feelings of that as well. This deep depth or darkness, not necessarily darkness in a bad way, where it's, when you're a little kid and it's dark at night. That's not what that is. Yeah, so that's kind of what we mean by Mai Ka Pō Mai. So that's kind of why I wanted to name it this, and yeah, go from there. And you know, for this presentation, I'll share a little bit about our process of how we got a lot of that information, how we put together Mai Ka Pō Mai, and you know, where we're going to go, share a little bit about that. But as far as our historical content, for us in Papahānaumokuākea, there's, you know, what started in the let me back up a little bit. So in the early 1900s, there wasn't much information known about the Northwest Hawaiian Islands. And I mean, that's a lot of that has to do with the time. People didn't really understand how to decipher things like chants, mo'olelo ka'au, things like that. However, when we look into it today, we find out that there is just a wealth of information from all these sources. Yeah. And the thought of archaeologists at the beginning was that Native Hawaiians never traveled beyond the island of Mokumanamana because they couldn't find physical evidence, right? Archaeological evidence is what they always look for to determine people. And that is not necessarily true because our stories tell us differently, right? Our stories tell us, you know, Hawaiians were travelers. They'd sailed all over the world. All over the place, and definitely the Northwest Hawaiian Islands. And when you have names for places, which there were traditional names for the places all the way up to Kure Atoll, it means that somebody was there and somebody had a relationship to that place. Yeah. So that just proves the point of how important these traditional sources of information are. As far as where we get it from, chants are very important because they provide specific data about the world, or you can pull specific data about the world, the more definitive things that are happening, the definitive actions that occurred. There's also mo'oku'auhau, which is genealogy. Genealogies are another definitive thing because they're people, right? A lot of times for in Hawaiian genealogies, you will have places as well, right? A place was just as much a part of you as your family member, right? So genealogies are very important. I mentioned mo'olelo and ka'au. Those are they're types of stories, yeah. Lots of layered meanings, not necessarily legends, so to say, but embellished stories, yeah. Not necessarily all the way true, but you can pull out feelings, you can pull out situations, definitely places and people for sure, within those traditional contexts. And so you can pull out a lot of meanings from there as well. And then for the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, because Kauai and Ni'iho is obviously the closest proximity to those islands, there's a lot of stories of people from there traveling up the Northwest Hawaiian Islands. So just for example, some of the stories that we do have, Pele is probably the most well-known one. She's totally going off right now at Kilauea. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but it's really awesome. Earthquake the other day. I don't know if you guys felt that on Oahu. That was cool. Yeah, her story, the first time she arrived in Hawaii is up in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands. She arrives at this place of Moku Papapa, which that is it's a low flat island. And then she arrives at Moku Mana, which is the second island within the Northwest, and then Nihoa after that, and makes her way down the chain. And obviously we associate her persona with a fiery figure of volcanoes. And so that's how we understand, that's how this geological information is embedded in these stories, is how she makes her way in that direction. So that's important. So there's other ones, Kaʻaleleo, Opele Nuia Iku, Mo'oinanea, Kianini, Wakea, so there's a whole bunch of them. And these are just, these bottom ones, references to places. Those are important as well, because they're either from Chants or other stories that reference the Northwest Hawaiian Islands. As far as specific Chants, the Kumulipo is probably the most well-known cosmogonic genealogy of Hawaii, because it goes into depth, I think, about species and the environment, and how not necessarily just listing species, but telling us about their interactions with each other, how the environment interacts with each other. It's the way to describe it is the genesis of things happening every day. So the processes of nature that happen every day. So the scholars that do understand how to translate this in a proper way can pull out things like transpiration of plants, or how to predict earthquakes, or how to understand clouds, and how to understand water resources a little bit better. So there's a lot of these things embedded within these chants that if you have the skills, I guess, and the talent, which I don't, but I know that there's guys out there that do. But yeah, you can look into those things. The important part of Kumulipo is it sets the foundation for our archipelago, our Pai'aina. So half of this chant occurs within this realm of Po, half of it occurs in the realm of Ao. And again, you see the word Po again, this night, this darkness, the source from which life comes from and returns to upon passing. Spirit world, a realm of Akua, and not necessarily Akua for gods. I think that's a common translation of Akua is gods. But what I've heard described it as is the elements of nature, things that nature needs to exist. And the Kumulipo really sets the foundation for our understanding of Papahānaumokuākea and what we use for Mai Ka Pō Mai. The second half of the chant within Ao shares a lot about people. It's a genealogy of people, starting with the first man, the first woman, things like that, and expresses things like personality types, what makes a person. There's like really interesting things like that, just characteristics. So a genesis of totally everything. So speaking about Po and Ao, we have our realms here, and I wanted to share this this line here just to set our foundation for Hawaii.
Right, if you click
Oh.
on that bottom, yeah.
This one? Oh, then I have a pointer. There's a pointer. Hey, look at that. Oh, can you see that? Oh, you can. Okay, so that line over there, that's we have it written as Ke'alapolo Hiva Akane. That's basically the Tropic of Cancer. Yeah, that's what we call the Tropic of Cancer. It's also the name for the time of the year that occurs at, which is the summer solstice. So the northern limit of the sun usually occurs about June 19th to the 21st. But what's important about that is it splits our archipelago into two realms. So you have Po, which is beyond everything north and beyond of the Tropic of Cancer, and then south of that, which is Ao. And when you look at the island names, the island chain and everything, and if you think geologically as well, this Tropic of Cancer goes directly over this island of Moku Mana, and that island has a lot of significance towards cultural traditions and Hawaiian religion back in the day, as far as using it to understand Po a little bit better. I'm using for them to petition their gods or their akua for mana, to obtain mana from that. And that's what that island was. It was the closest place physically you could be to your ancestors, but also at the time of the summer solstice, it was the closest place physically and spiritually you could be at that time to gain that mana. So when you think about Po as this place of akua or the elements or gods or whatever, you see all these islands, and all of these islands up here, they're all, this is French Frigate Shoal, Gardner Pinnacles, Marl Reef, Laysan, Louisiana, all the way up to Polaniku, which is Kure Atoll. These are all atolls, they're very low-lying places, right? And we think physically as us as humans, can we actually live there? No, I mean, people do because we take a lot of stuff over there, but it takes a lot of effort, yeah? So just concepts like pulling out really pull out our understanding of our world from a physical sense too, yeah? And then all light of the living, where we reside, and obviously higher islands, lots of resources where we are. And then just culturally, Mokumana, these two islands in the middle, Mokumana Mana and Nihoa, they're kind of this pivot point between the two realms, and that's what they have to do. Okay, just to go a little bit to some of the mo'olelo. So Ke'aumele is one. So a lot of the information that we found for Papahānaumokuākea came from a lot of these Hawaiian language newspaper resources. And just for a little bit of history, if folks do not know, in the 1800s, after Hawaiian language began to be written down after the missionaries showed up, people were super interested in that. I think the statistic was over 90% of the population in Hawaii could read and write in Hawaiian, yeah, which is that's a very, very high number, I think, for that time. So there's hundreds and hundreds of Hawaiian language newspapers out there with a wealth of information of everything. And so things like these stories, this Ke'aumele being one of them, can be found. So this was written in Nupepaku'oko'a from 1884 to 1885. A lot of it describes cloud formations, predicting cloud formations, predicting those kinds of weathers. There's some excerpts that I think are pretty cool about pearl oysters, and how pearl oysters arrive into Pu'uloa, which Pu'uloa is Pearl Harbor. And so they talk about that, where they came from up at Kuaihelani. And Kuaihelani is usually associated with with Midway Atoll right now, and there's pearl oysters up there. So it's really interesting that you have this story way back then, and they're describing where these pearl oysters came from. Yeah? So things like that are pretty cool. Keanini Ula o Kalani. This is another story of travel. So obviously, a lot of these stories are based on voyaging and traveling on the water. And that's kind of the experiences that they had, right? That was how they got from A to B. This one talks about these two brothers, Keaumiki and Keoka. They're associated with ocean currents and how these currents move, how they help and inhibit you from going somewhere. So yeah, things like that, just trying to understand, maybe folks that are more into ocean-related oceanography and stuff like that. I think that has a lot of application for that kind of realm. A lot of these stories talk a lot about ho'ailona, which are signs from nature, right? And how and the practice of kilo, or observing, a little bit better, observing nature better. So this photo is actually one of my trips to Nihoa on the Kunu Hikianalia, and yeah, it's the brothers were inhibiting us from getting there at this point in time. So those are some of the things, right? When you're experiencing what the story experienced, right? Then you start understanding what it means a little bit better. So yeah, it takes that experience to really understand these stories. Okele Nui Iku is another one. Talks about journeys from Kuaihelani to Kalaka Inui, Akane, and back. Again, this one also has context of geology in it. In the beginning of the story, Okele is from Kuaihelani, and at that time, Kuaihelani is this big, large island, just like Oahu, all kinds of resources. He goes on this super long journey all over the place. Talks a lot about Kawaiakane and water resources. So I think maybe that's something that's important to point out. But super long journey. By the time he gets back, Kuaihelani is now covered in coral, and he has to break through coral to get to his grandmother towards the end of the story. So again, infusing understandings of how islands are formed or what happens to an island over time, right? So, you know, just really trying to think in more of a, not necessarily that these stories are true, but that there are things that we can pull out of it that, especially physically about the world. Yeah. So with all that kind of historical information that I shared, what we wanted to do was create a way to utilize it within our management of Papahānaumokuākea. So the goals of Mai Ka Pō Mai, this document that we put together, we wanted it to be recognized as some sort of management document. We wanted it to incorporate that, you know, all these traditional foundations and this historical information. We wanted it to be accessible and understood by managers specifically, but others as well. And we wanted it to, most importantly, we wanted to resonate with Native Hawaiians and make sure that it did encompass a lot of their thoughts about how we should manage, specifically Papahānaumokuākea. So what we did was we used a lot of our traditional constructs of our understanding of Hawaiian understanding of the world. So think about it as you're a canoe in the middle of the ocean, and this is the dome of the sky. Usually you'll have the way that Hawaiian saw it, there were pillars that held up the sky. So usually there's four. We have a fifth one here. The fifth one correlates to the middle. So usually there's a we call them kukulu. So the kukulu hold up the sky, and the ho'oku'i, or the peak, the point, is kind of the highest point, yeah, that oversees everything. So we use a lot of those constructs as well as those concepts of po and ao to really put this together in a more of a traditional sense. So the way that Mai Ka Pō Mai was put together for us, we wanted these kukulu, each of these columns are kukulu, and we wanted them to reflect across the pai'aina as far as where po is and where ao is. So when you have our first kukulu here, we call it Omana. What we wanted to do for the Northwest Hawaiian Islands was express what was the purpose of Hawaiian ancestors to going to that region. A lot of times it was about gaining mana. So when you have po'o in front of something, it just makes it an action. So that's what that one's about. And then you have ho'ike and also about physically being there, providing research. And then this other kukulu over here, ho'oulu, which talks about more of interactions with organizations and people, something that more happens within the main Hawaiian Islands where you have people, right? And then education outreach, kind of a similar way. So. Okay. So I'll go on just a little bit about each of these kukulu. So ho'omana, like I shared, is about creating mana, right? And what does that really mean to create mana? It's a word I think is used, I guess not very often, but is known as far as spiritual power. But what is that spiritual power in a sense of today, right? A lot of this is taken into context of how do we apply it today, right? This is not necessarily a traditional sense of mana of where they thought about it back in the day. So the purpose of Omana was to be a living spiritual foundation for the natural environment. We wanted to honor and perpetuate the spiritual and cultural relationships with Papahānaumokuākea. The most important thing is affirming respect and reciprocity with the natural environment. And that was one way to gain mana, right? Was to or to show mana, right? Was to have that back and forth with the place. So you're not necessarily just taking from Papahānaumokuākea, but you're also giving to it in some way too. So as you can see, some of the outcomes, managers, researchers, and practitioners who access, they're engaged in cultural protocols that acknowledge the place and spiritual significance. So that's something that builds mana in a way. So think about it like you're going to somebody's house, right? Cultural protocols is not necessarily doing a chant. You don't have to if you don't know them. But you're always gonna, if you go to somebody's house, you're gonna knock on the door, and you're going to introduce yourself, and then you're going to wait for them to introduce you and let you come in, right? So to me, that's what protocols really means, right? It's yourself introducing yourself to the place, right? So that's that sense. And to me, it's in a way, it's to slow down, right? A lot of times when we go to somewhere, especially, in the context for me, when we're going on trips to Northwest Hawaiian Islands, logistics, there's a lot of that, safety concerns, the planning, the preparation, all of those things are always a concern, and they take up a lot of time, just a lot of energy. So when you have things like cultural protocols, it helps you ground yourself and remember why you're doing the thing that you're doing over there, right? So I think that's that. I think that applies still to today, right? To just step back, right? Take that step back. And then again, I'm here in the bottom, activities, cultivate reciprocity and community for those accessing Papahānaumokuākea. So these are some of the other desired elements. Some of the strategies that we wanted to use, manage the natural and cultural landscape through the practice of aloha aina. And aloha aina really describes, going back to what mana means, right? And the reciprocity. It's not necessarily your managing the land in a way, but you're caring for it on a really deeper sense. And the Hawaiian perspective that we always talk about is caring for it as kin, almost like it's part of your family. Like you think about when I mentioned those genealogies, your place where you're from is part of your genealogy, right? Which means it's part of your family. So I think that's something that's really important. And a lot of these things, what we wanted it to transcend cultures, right? Like I think that concept can transcend more than just Native Hawaiian, right? Or even people from Hawaii. I think that's something important, a perspective to use in how we manage the environment. Perpetuate Hawaiian cultural knowledge and practices and values. So that's a pretty basic one, but again, utilizing things like oli, these mo'olelo, how do you perpetuate that? Again, it is also important for protections through access for Native Hawaiians and for Papahānaumokuākea. I'll use for an example. There's the last trip I went on in August, we had a community member from Kauai. He's this 16-year-old kid, definitely does not look 16, looked like he was like 35 or something, like big kid. Super smart kid, super bright, sharp, awesome kid. But he can trace his genealogy to the island of Nihoa. So I think I want to say it's his grandfather, great was from the island of Nihoa as a kid, and they moved to Kauai. What they talk about in the family is they were evicted, so they don't know a whole lot about the island. But at the same time, they're from the island, right? Which is really awesome. And for me to have that opportunity to be with him, to take him to the island, was really special for me, because there is going to be that deeper relationship to the place. And for them, at least for that family, it's important for them to reconnect to that place in that deeper meaning. So that's an example of what we mean by this Omana. And then amplifying the cultural and spiritual experience. So again, just being in that place to have that connection to that area. So kukulu ho'ike. What we described as so the root word of ho'ike is ike, and ike is knowledge, yeah. So producing knowledge. And so knowledge is something that all cultures crave for, that all cultures understood. And for Papahānaumokuākea, we described it as it's a place of abundant knowledge, and we wanted to demonstrate that on all kinds of levels. So some of the outcomes that we had was that multiple perspectives and knowledge systems were incorporated into our research, yeah? So what we mean by multiple knowledge systems, it wasn't necessarily just using, for lack of a better term, contemporary or Western science tools, right? Those are obviously great tools, the things that we use every day. Those are great things to use. Well, we also wanted to use Native Hawaiian perspectives on how you understand the environment a little bit better. So it adds a little bit more of just a different aspect to it, right? A different way to look at the environment, yeah. And like I shared earlier about the kumulipo and these relationships to species, if you understand relationships to two different species, say like, for instance, I think the most famous one, or think of Olelo no Eo, right? The most famous one that I kind of know of is, I think it's Pua ka wili wili nanahu kamano, which is when the wili wili flower is blooming, the sharks are going to bite, right? So you have these two correlations of nature, right? When that happens. So what happens if the wili wili blooms a little bit later, right? Do the sharks end up biting later in the season or something like that, right? So understanding those relationships and how they shift in the year can help you understand all these other occurrences in nature. Yeah. So not necessarily just using our tools to understand when sharks are going to be fighting all the tourists on Maui, but trying to use our traditional understandings of when that's going to be. Yeah. So let's see. So some of the strategies that we want to use: conduct research and monitoring. That's what I was talking about multiple perspectives. Support, facilitate, and conduct coin methods of science and research. So that was what I was talking about. So there's a type of research that we use to understand the environment a little bit better, and trying to create modern day olelo no eo, or these wise sayings, or understandings of the relationships of species or the environment, right? We have a lot of different animals and plants out here today that we did 100 years ago. So then they're all going to have some type of relationship with the other things around them. So how do we continue to figure out what that is and then apply it into some sort of way that's usable by us? So that's what that means by that strategy. Support research on Hawaiian cultural heritage traditions and the history. So again, I shared a lot of those historical documents. So going back into those historical documents to see what we can pull out, and then promote alignment around research initiatives of the co-managing agencies and committees. And there is we have what's called a culture working group made up of Native Hawaiians from all the islands. They're essentially the de facto community for the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, but they have a specific types of research they want to see happen first. And so it's about trying to align those things. Okay, ho'oulu, again, we move into the realm of ao, so light, living people. So ho'oulu, the root word is ulu, which means to grow. So how are we growing, right? How are we helping us to grow? How are we helping Papahānaumokuākea to grow? So that's the way to think about it, is collaborative partnerships. Seems like all you guys are that type of collaborative partnership, kind of trying to build that network so that we can better do the things that we're supposed to be doing. Yeah. The way, as far as Papahānaumokuākea, the way I see it, all these agencies have a particular perspective and value. Yeah. And how do you leverage those types of partnerships? Because one agency usually can't get it done in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, but when you have multiple, not necessarily just funding, but you have perspective, resources, expertise, and things like that help you to get where you're going. So some of the outcomes, partnerships and collaborations with the community support shared educational, environmental, and stewardship goals across the Pai'aina. The culture work group, which I mentioned was our de facto community, was to engage, influence, and improve. Their engagement helps influence and improve management decisions. And then let's see. So some of the strategies to achieve those: engage and collaborate with community and leaders involved in Mālama Aina work. So as far as Papahānaumokuākea, it was always meant, the way that we think of the place is, it's always been a source of knowledge, right? And so for the folks that do great work here in the main Hawaiian Islands, how do we get them to see the places up there, to be inspired in a different way, to go to this place of po, this physical place of po, and how do you get them to be there to bring back the lessons that they learned and then apply it to wherever they're at? Yeah. So that's kind of what that engagement means. Obviously the culture work group again. developing partnerships and collaborations. And the last one, developing and support initiatives that focus on Native Hawaiian generational capacity building. So again, just always thinking about next generation or future generations, and how do you keep things sustainable? Yeah. Ho'olaha, laha means to spread out. Think of like an octopus spreading out. This one was about education and outreach initiatives. How do you spread your word out to everybody to let them know what's happening? Part of it, everyone understands the cultural importance of Papahānaumokuākea. I think that is an important part of history. I think a lot of people know more recent history. Midway, the Battle of Midway. I don't know what else. The bird feather collections at Laysan Island, where they totally decimated the island, things like that. But there's a wealth of cultural history there spanning hundreds and hundreds of years. And one of the outcomes we also want to see is people feel that sense of kuleana to that place. I think kuleana is important, that need to want to participate, right? That need to want to do a little bit more to understand. So that's what we wanted to develop. So just real brief, a couple of the strategies. Developing educational programs based on Hawaiian values. That was something that's important for us. Conducting symposia is always important, right? That's a way to share out our information. Let's see. And then, yeah, identify, share, and promote innovative research and other place-based activities that can serve as a model for research management. So again, trying to take what we learn in Papahānaumokuākea and applying it to the main Hawaiian Islands. I think that's always important. How can we use information from there to apply to here? An example would be, this photos of Kanoe Morishige. She does a lot of the OPE research, both in the main Hawaiian Islands and in Papahānaumokuākea. And so what they're looking at is trying to figure out what the best, I guess, harvesting capacity almost. What is the best productive ability of opihi? What are the minimum sizes that you could harvest or maximum sizes that you can harvest to keep the population sustainable, to provide us with the most opihi that we can possibly get. So they work with communities in the main Hawaiian Islands that do opihi surveys and research. I think Hana, Kipahulu, Kaʻaleleo in the Big Island, Ha'ena on Kauai. So they work with a lot of these communities to try to understand those resources. And then same thing in Papahānaumokuākea, you can learn a lot from there because it's an unimpacted area. Yeah, there's no harvesting, so you can understand what are the possibilities of these growth circles. There's a particular location at French Frigate Shoals where you would think there's just hundreds and hundreds of OP, but there's not. There's it's kind of sparse, but they're all huge. They're all really, really huge, right? So what are the environmental conditions that are allowing them to be super huge, but not a whole lot of them, right? Maybe there's just not a lot of limu on the rocks for them to eat. And so all the big ones just outcompete everything else. And so from that, you understand that there could be a harvesting pressure that can help benefit, population as far as population growth. Yeah. So what is that capacity that you can get? That's my last slide. Oh, it's not. Dang. Ho'oku'i. So ho'oku'i, like I shared before, is the zenith of this point, and this is mostly about the managing agencies and how we operate and how we are integrating Hawaiian cultural knowledge and perspectives.
Oh, yeah, go down.
Okay. Yeah, so ensure policies and programs that permeate relevant cultural knowledge, use Hawaiian knowledge, values, and traditions throughout all areas of management. And then managing data, so providing data to communities so that you use it for other things. So yeah, here's my final slide. So in summary, Mai Ka Pō Mai uplifts Hawaiian culture and provides Hawaiian perspectives on ways to approach management of Papahānaumokuākea. We think that's So the second one, Papahānaumokuākea, is significant because it demonstrates that Native Hawaiian voices, when they're given equal footing with federal and state entities in a management structure, it can lead to successful stewardship. And this final thing is the biggest point I wanted to make is that traditional and indigenous management is the best management practice, right? And so I think that's where we wanted to talk about over here, I think your Mālama ethic, and using Hawaiian perspectives to apply to our everyday world, right? And the perspectives, I think, is what transcends time and space and people. But for me, it's like we're living in Hawaii. We should do things in a Hawaii way. Obviously, the tools that they have on elsewhere are important, right? And you use those tools, but you have to maintain to me, it's about maintaining our perspective on how we want to do things here to keep things Hawaii. So that's it. That's it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Everyone
good.
that joined, if you